Hello everybody and welcome to part 35 and the penultimate episode of Kerbal Space Program. The journey continues. We rejoin our Kerbals exactly where we left them last time, in the Midlands of Dres. We've planted a flag, we've taken some reports, but we've got more to do in this location and we've got a lot more to do on this planet, so let's get moving. Bargel and Donford make their way back to the lander to control things from there, whilst Johnny Kerman prepares to leap into action during the science-gathering phase of this little excursion. We crack open the science bay. This craft does have a lot of experiments on board, far more than we need, because it was designed to be able to take several sets of experiments on descent through an atmosphere, although obviously that's not needed here. As usual, we're trying to get 2 complete sets of data here, but we've only got 1 experiment storage container on board, so we get 1 set stored there, and then we just leave the other set on board the experiments, or in the case of the reports and the surface sample, on board the command module, for us to deal with once we get back up into orbit. Having made sure we've got all the science we need and that it's all in the correct place, our science officer Johnny Kerman climbs back aboard the command module, and it's time for us to depart the surface and head back up into orbit to rendezvous with our mothership, the Ptolemy. The fuel situation is looking really good at this point. We lifted off from the surface with more than 3/4 of this craft's Delta V remaining, so we should have the option of conducting up to 4 landings with this craft, should we choose to take it. Anyway, our lander reaches its desired orbit of about 10 kilometres, and I suddenly realise we have a bit of a problem. I didn't time our launch correctly. I didn't wait until the Ptolemy was in the correct place, and now we've got to wait a fair old while to catch it up. Compounding the issue is the fact that both of our craft in their orbits are currently limited to 10 times time acceleration, so I decide, for the sake of any future missions that might find themselves in this particular predicament, to do something about it. We're going to raise the orbit of the Ptolemy up to just a little over 30,000 metres, just to make sure we don't encounter that problem again. With that done, we can easily progress to the point where we can perform our rendezvous manoeuvre with our lander, and we arrive at the Ptolemy ready to bring ourselves into dock, and then to unload all of the science we have gained whilst on the surface. Transferring the science across from our lander's experiment storage container is a doddle. The rest of it's a bit more of a pain, and of course Johnny Kerman has to get out to make sure that everything ends up where we want it to. But with that, our first return journey down to the surface of Dres is drawn to a successful conclusion. The only question now is, how many more of them are we going to make? Regardless, we will be going down for a second trip, and unless something goes disastrously wrong, a third one as well. So it's time for us to get this next one going. Kerbal Kerman is taking her turn to command a mission down to the surface, so we swap her out for Donford Kerman, and our crew is ready for departure. We undock the lander, we open up a bit of separation between ourselves and the Ptolemy. We're going to go straight in for a landing from this altitude, so it's just a case of picking our spot from here. I noticed on the way down during our last mission that we passed by a little gorge, a little crevasse, and next to that are some highlands. So we haven't been there before. The highlands biome seems to be a little sparse, so that's probably a good place for us to aim for. The steeper descent does cut down on our journey time a little bit, although not as much as I would have liked. I get a little bit nervous as we're approaching our landing site because the highlands doesn't show up in the biome indicator until right at the last minute. The ridges crops up, the elusive ridges, which would be a good one to tick off if we were going for 4 landings, but eventually we do touch down nice and softly in our originally intended destination. Kerbal Kerman is the first out and gets her feet on Dres for the first time, and whilst this isn't as dull as Ike, as Kerbal notes in the plaque on the flag we're leaving, it could certainly do with a theme park or something. Bargel and Johnny join Kerbal on the surface for some brief fun and games, but before too long we have to get back down to business. Kerbal and Bargel climb back aboard the lander, and Johnny gets ready because we need to harvest yet more science from this little planet. We crack open the science bay, we take some readings, Johnny Kerman shuffles some stuff about, we take another set of readings, we get all that moved into the correct place, and before too long this second sweep of the surface has finished, and we are ready to make our way back into orbit to once again rendezvous with our mothership. The journey into orbit goes well, although once again I have forgotten to check on the relative position of the Ptolemy before we lifted off, and it's not ideal. There's a fair amount of time acceleration needed, but fortunately we have prepared for just such a scenario. We switch to the Ptolemy, we time accelerate a little bit, and it's not too long before our lander is ideally placed and can begin its rendezvous manoeuvre. Arriving at the Ptolemy, it's just a case of repeating exactly what we did last time. Getting ourselves docked, transferring across what science we can, and then getting Johnny Kerman out to deal with the rest of it. And with that, our second mission down to the surface has also been a success. We've managed both of those excursions on just the one tank of fuel, so it's looking good for 4 trips, should we choose to do that. For the time being, though, we need to get set up for our third, so we completely fuel the lander, monopropellant, and the liquid fuel oxidizer mix, and we prepare to go again. Donfort Kerman is back in command for this one as we detach the lander and start mulling over where we're going to touch down this time. By this point, I have decided that we will go for 4 landings if at all possible, and this is going to affect our choice of a suitable landing site. One of those biomes will probably have to be the lowlands. It's a nice, easy biome to reach. The other one will be looking at either some ridges or some of the impact craters. I spot a pretty ideally placed hill which should contain some ridges biome, and if not, well, it's just a short hop to some of the lowlands, and then we can pick something else up next time. As we're coming down, we do fly over a small crater-like region which has ridges biomes round the sides, but after that it's just solid midlands all the way down, and that is where we land. But we've already been to this biome, so it's not really any good, and we will need to do a bit of a hop. As I said, if this happened, I had planned to hop back to the lowlands, but that little crater we passed is much closer, so I decide I'm going to give that a go, see if we can make our way back there. It doesn't take us very long to get over there, although it does use a lot more delta V than I was hoping it would, which may cause us problems a little later on, but we do at least get a nice, soft, if somewhat slopey landing in the much sought after ridges biome. Donfort is the first out of the command module and down onto the surface, where he plants a flag and makes the observation that if a theme park is perhaps a little too ambitious, then maybe somebody could build a swimming pool or something. Bargel and Johnny briefly join Donfort on the surface, but we've got business to take care of, so Donfort and Bargel, having climbed aboard and cracked open that science bay, we can get to work. With the assistance of Johnny Kerman, we take and store our 2 full sets of readings, reports and samples before Johnny climbs back aboard and we are ready once again to make our ascent. So once again we take off, and once again I have completely failed to check where the Ptolemy was in its orbit. I'm kind of hoping at this point that it's 4th time lucky, but who knows if there even will be a 4th time with the fuel situation. We'll have to see how much fuel is left in the refuelling tank aboard the Ptolemy. At least once we're in orbit, we can switch to the Ptolemy, time accelerate until the lander is in the perfect position to make its intercept burns, and once it returns, we can transfer all that science across with the assistance of Johnny Kerman once again, and with that, our 3rd expedition is complete, and now we have to decide whether or not we are going to risk going for a 4th. We transfer all of the available fuel across to the lander, which gives us a touch over half a tank, and we are safe to go for another trip down to the surface, but only just. That little hop nearly cost us dearly, but no, we are good to go for a 4th landing. So Kerbal Kerman is back at the controls for this one as we detach the lander and start to make our way down towards the surface of Dres for one final time. The fuel situation isn't perfect, but we do have a little bit of margin of error, and it's not like we're trying to aim at some tiny target either. We can just go for one of these large expanses of lowlands, these dark patches you can see on the surface of Dres, so we certainly shouldn't be needing to make any fuel-draining hop or anything like that. I was hoping nothing would go wrong with this descent, and fortunately nothing does. It's a textbook descent and then a nice soft landing on a piece of level ground. So far the KSP gods have been smiling on us. Let's hope it continues. Kerbal Kerman gets out, climbs down the ladder and of course plants the flag, and despite all of our hopes of excitement somewhere on the surface, I think that by this point we'd settle for somewhere to buy ice cream. Bargel and Johnny make their way down the ladder as well to make the most of their final trip down to the surface of Dres, but it's all over too soon. We have much to take care of, and we do at some point need to start making our way home. Much as we have done the previous 3 times, we crack open the science bay, we take all of our readings, and with the assistance of Johnny Kerman, we get them stored in the correct places. And that is that. That is us done. That is all of our objectives completed for the surface of this little grey planet. We lift off, leaving Dres behind us, and I'm sure that despite its total lack of theme parks, swimming pools or ice cream parlours, we will nonetheless miss it. This time I did remember to check on the position of the Ptolemy. The one time I remembered, and it was completely redundant because the Ptolemy was in a perfect position anyway. Never mind, it can only speed our rendezvous with the Ptolemy, and it's been a very fruitful few trips down to the surface. We are going to leave Dres with a lot of science to show for our efforts. We meet up with our mothership before bringing ourselves into dock one final time, and of course transferring that science across. We arrived with more than 500 metres per second of delta V remaining, which kind of made me think that if we hadn't made that fuel-wasting hop on the third trip down, if we'd been a bit more fuel-conscious with some of our other journeys, then maybe, just maybe, we could have gone for a fifth landing and aimed for something like the impact craters, but it's all academic by this point. The Kerbals are back aboard, the science is stowed, and we have finished our mission to Dres. We have harvested as much science as we reasonably can, and now it's time to start thinking about making our way back home to Kerbin. With all of our business here finished, it's time for us to prepare the Ptolemy for its transfer burn back to Kerbin, which in this case just means raising its orbit into something slower, something that will make that transfer burn a little bit more efficient. Traditionally, I go for an altitude of about 1,000 kilometres, and this one is going to be no exception, at least not initially. We light up those engines, we start to raise that apoapsis. With Dres being a very low gravity planet, it doesn't take long, it doesn't take much thrusting for us to raise that up to our desired altitude, but there's a bit of a problem here. With the aforementioned low gravity, 1,000 kilometres is a very, very slow orbit. Too slow, in fact. So I don't bother to circularise there. We're just going to come back round to periapsis. We're going to burn retrograde, and we're going to lower that apoapsis down to about 500 kilometres. I think that will be a little bit more sensible. We perform that burn, we travel around to apoapsis at our new, slightly saner altitude, and we circularise from there. And that is that. We are set up to perform our transfer burn, and we have some very good news on that front. Now, normally when we're planning our way home from a mission like this, one of two things will happen. Either we'll have to wait a while for our optimum transfer window to open up, or we'll have to expend a load of extra delta V on some hideously inefficient and very long transfer, as happened recently with Eve. Not for this mission, however, because we are in the middle of a very fuel-efficient transfer window right now. In fact, and I did check this, a more fuel-efficient transfer window won't open up for in excess of 10 years of game time, so I think it's best we strike whilst the iron is hot. So we switch to map view, we start planning the manoeuvre. This was a bit of a weird one. I got a reasonably close approach very quickly, but then it became very fiddly trying to work it down into a full encounter. It's not as bad as some of the other manoeuvres I've planned in the past, but yeah, still a little irritating nonetheless. But we do eventually get ourselves a good manoeuvre planned, which should see us on an encounter with Kerbin. Our manoeuvre node isn't very far away, so we get the Ptolemy pointing in the right direction, we time accelerate a little further forward, and then we light up those engines to commence that transfer burn. The burn time indicator was up to its usual tricks before we started this manoeuvre. Initially it showed about an hour and a half and then 28 minutes. So I had to kind of guess it, so I went for about 14-15 minutes and started this burn at the appropriate time. In the end, it was more like 10 minutes. I've got to uninstall that better burn times mod. I'm not sure if that's screwing with things, but I think the logical step is to try uninstalling that and see if that improves things at all. Right towards the end of the burn, we switch to the map view so that we can close the throttles as and when we pick up our encounter. We overshoot slightly thanks to the fact that these engines don't power down immediately, but a little bit of RCS thrusting retrograde does restore that encounter, and we are finally on our way back home. So the final leg of the final mission of this series has started, and it's going to take about a year and 150 days for us to reach Kerbin. We're going to have to find something to fill that gap, and I'm sure that plenty of housekeeping opportunities will present themselves. In fact, we may as well go and get started with some of that right now, a little bit closer to home. And so, a little while later, we find ourselves here in orbit around Kerbin with our space station in the Socrates. Enough time has passed now that our science lab has filled with science, so it's time for us to get that transmitting back down to Kerbin and obviously to check that the science lab is full of experiments, chuck in any spare ones we have lying around if it's not, and make sure that's operating at its peak efficiency. Now, we have to do this roughly every 100 days of game time, so in the time it's going to take the Ptolemy to get back to Kerbin, we're going to be doing this a lot. I don't think I'll show you all of them. I think that will be excessive. For now, I'll just show you this one, and we'll call that illustrative of the process as a whole. One thing's for certain, though, and that is that by the time that Kerdar, Donfort and co. Get back home, we will have thrown a lot more science on the pile, which, as I've said many times already this series, we're not going to be doing anything with for the moment. And if we do go ahead with a future series, we will have some serious science to spend. So with that first batch of science sorted then, we will be leaving things here for the time being. I do hope you've enjoyed it, everybody. If you have, please consider liking, subscribing, maybe even following me on Twitter, or why not pop into the brand new Discord server? I'll be making a proper announcement about that shortly, but details in the description. So, as I mentioned, next time should be the final episode of this series, if all goes to plan, and I can't see any reason why it wouldn't, but yes, I look forward to seeing you for that. So, in the meantime, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.